So we can see it is such a habit to look at those around us and look to them for our happiness. And then when we have problems, to blame them for our difficulties. We have practiced this since beginningless time. And if we check up when we're caught in those habits, we can see it's quite a dead-end road, and it really only brings misery. Unfortunately, the Buddha found another way to live that brings peace and happiness. We do this by training ourselves to work with our inner landscape, our inner experience, our mind. We apply the methods the Buddha taught to transform our minds. And so today we have the opportunity to learn about our mind, develop our good qualities, learn what habits to abandon, and then to bring peace and happiness to others as well as ourselves. So we can remember that we all have the potential to become Buddhas. And so let's have compassion for ourselves and others as we learn and share today and progress on this path into full awakening. So we've been going through this book at each of the Sharing the Dharma days, An Open-Hearted Life, and that's a book that Venerable Chödrön co-authored with Russell Coates, who is a psychologist and a professor at Eastern Washington University. And the book is mostly focused on developing our compassion. And so today we'll go through chapter 24, but I thought to give a little bit of review because we're kind of in the middle of the 7-point instruction of cause and effect. And so this chapter today is the second of 2 chapters in the section on how to generate compassion and the altruistic intention. And there's 2 methods for doing that, and we're on the first method, as I said, the 7-point instruction of cause and effect. And so it's helpful to remember that the foundation for both of these practices is equanimity. And this practice targets our habit of categorizing people as friend, enemy, and stranger. And we break this down by seeing how all of us are fundamentally the same. Because if we categorize people in those solid, fixed ways, then we don't see how they change, and we don't really see how ourselves change. So it really puts us in a box and brings a lot of suffering and misery, actually. And so we think about, instead of categorizing people in certain boxes, friend, enemy, and stranger, we think about we're all the same. And we're all the same in this fundamental way that we all want happiness and nobody wants to suffer across the board. That's true of all living beings. I mean, even, insects, if we bother an insect, they try to get away from any suffering, So every living being has this. And so if we start thinking about how we're all the same, that starts to break down these barriers and these ways that we separate ourselves from others and feel disconnected. And it opens up the possibility to develop concern for every living being. And when we do that, we actually have a lot of joy and happiness. So this, the chapter that Venerable Chodron talked about last Sharing the Dharma Day, that was the first 3 points of the 7-point instruction on cause and effect. And step 1 involves contemplating that we are connected to all living beings. We live in the same universe and so are related to each other. In step 2, we reflect on the kindness of whoever took care of us when we were young. And we think about that in not only this life, but in all previous lives. And so it could be our parents or our grandparents or babysitter, teachers, or a number of people together who made sure that we had food, shelter, clothing, medical care, education. And so to meditate on the kindness of all of these people is very powerful and very helpful. And now, we all have different experiences growing up, and maybe we've had a difficult time growing up, and it wasn't so simple. But, and we may have strong feelings about those that cared for us, that they weren't so skillful or, were difficult or, even cruel to us. But we can always, without a doubt, always go back to the basic beginning. They gave us life. And then if we think about it, when we were infants, if no one took care of us, we would have died. It doesn't take hardly any hours for an infant to die if not being cared for. So no matter how we were related to, throughout our life with our family, they gave us life and they kept us alive. And so we can always focus on that. And then as we continue to practice, it's very helpful to open our hearts and start to think about how all of our parents had all kinds of difficulties and had all kinds of obstacles. And we can say, for ourselves, every day I do the best I can. Sometimes I harm people, sometimes it's very difficult, but every day I'm trying to do the best I can. And then by extension, we can think about those that grew us up, whoever that was, and our parents, that they also were doing the best they can. And so this kind of gets us back to that equanimity thing that, all of us are trying as best we can. And it's not a fixed thing, that everybody has the ability to transform and to grow themselves and to develop their good qualities. And so it's helpful to think deeply about those that cared for us when we were younger. It helps us. If we keep resentment and anger toward those, it really keeps us locked into those emotions. And, we don't deserve that. To open our hearts to all is very powerful, very helpful. And then step 3 is contemplating the kindness we received when we were growing up arouses this wish to repay that kindness. And what happens when we start doing that is that it starts opening our heart. And we talk a lot about that in our practice, that we open our heart. And so it's really helpful to make the discernment between intellectual chatter that goes on, and when I connect myself to another and open my heart, there's a difference in energy to that. There's a different way one feels when we do that. And so if that is kind of hard to get next to, or what does that really mean, you can think in your mind's eye, in your imagination, about something that gives you a lot of joy, something that was close to your heart. So it might be a little baby, it might be, it could be a pet. You can even do it with something that's very imaginary, that isn't something that we actually have. But for example, I like dogs, I like puppies. And so I can just think in my mind for a minute about 15 baby puppies running into this room, jumping all over me, licking me, wagging their tail. You can smell how puppies smell. They're just so wonderful. And just thinking about that, I smile. I can't not. It opens my heart. That's open heart. So that feeling that you get, that's the feeling that we want to connect with all of these teachings and understandings that we have about all of these methods. Otherwise, it just kind of stays up in our head and is just kind of intellectual information. And it doesn't really affect how we connect with others then. And so it's very helpful to think about opening our hearts and see when our hearts are open and see when our hearts are closed, and how can we exercise our ability to keep our heart open more and more. And that, of course, is a very complex process. It's not a simple thing. But the beauty of the Buddha's teachings is he addresses this in many, many different ways. So that's a very quick review of last chapter. So now we're on chapter 24, and it's love and compassion. And I'll read some and then maybe say a few things as we go forward. So she writes, this is the chapter that Venerable Chodron wrote. They kind of took turns writing some chapters, her and Russell, but she wrote this one. So she writes, love and compassion are built on the foundation of equanimity, which makes them stable. Without reducing our attachment to those we consider good people and friends, the love we feel for them will be dependent on how they treat us. Such love is in fact partly attachment because it fluctuates according to whether people are nice to us or not. To have stable love that will endure the ups and downs of life, we need to reduce our personal sensitivity to what others think of us and how they treat us. So that takes some effort and internal strength to think about that and to do that. So it's not about suppressing our emotional needs, it's about finding diverse ways to fulfill them. So that's an interesting thing to think about. So if we look to one or two people to fulfill all our needs, that's not going to work very well, is it? But we often do that, And so just to think about, opening up that many people can fulfill the needs that we have would reduce our attachment to one or two people or to a few people. And it would release more connection and more love to other people. It would open up our perspective. We could see the kindness of many other people. She goes on, it also involves learning to take delight in caring about the well-being of others. In other words, the reward of loving others isn't that others love us in return. It's that we feel completely delighted and fulfilled simply to give love. I don't know about you, but the way that I was conditioned was, if I love somebody, they should love me and take care of my needs, and, it should be directed toward me, not my love directing outward so much. Huh? I don't know, am I the only one that has that? Or is that, yeah. So this is really a kind of a different way to think about it. And I guess, too, that also is complicated, because if I give love to somebody and the love, and they, react in a negative manner, then it takes a lot of fortitude and a lot of awareness to not match that energy, but keep, with your own, I'm offering love, whatever you do with it. And so it's a complicated process. It's not so easy, at least it isn't for me. So step 4 and 5 in this 7-point is love and compassion. And so in the Buddhist way, love and compassion have specific meanings. And so love is the wish for someone to have happiness and its causes. And again, I don't know about you, but I was conditioned, if I'm in love, then somebody is going to be giving me the love and the happiness. And then compassion is the wish for them to be free of suffering and its causes. And so we may ask, what is happiness and what causes it? And what is suffering and what causes it? And from the Buddhist perspective, there are different types of happiness, temporal and spiritual. So temporal happiness is happiness that we experience in this life, chiefly due to external things, people and situations. For example, happiness is having good food, friends, possessions, success in our career, happy family life. The causes of this kind of happiness are a kind and generous heart, patience, effort, acting ethically, and making wise decisions. Spiritual happiness comes from transforming our heart and mind, liberating them from mental afflictions and developing good qualities such as love, compassion, generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, enthusiasm, and wisdom. The causes for spiritual happiness come from training our mind in these good qualities. So there's a lot here to think about and work with. Yeah? I mean, even temporal happiness, but we know that, don't we, from our own experience? If we have a kind and generous heart, that doesn't make us miserable, it makes us happy. Huh? If we have patience, if we act ethically, have some wisdom and make wise decisions, it brings happiness. She goes on, suffering likewise may be temporal or spiritual. Temporal misery may come from lacking the resources we need to live, not getting what we would like, not feeling good about ourselves, and the human condition of being subject to aging, sickness, and death. So again, there's a lot packed in this one too. So this temporal misery of not feeling good about ourselves. How many of us suffer from that one? Kind of common, isn't it? Yeah. And so we can see how it's connected to generating love and compassion for others has a beautiful feedback loop that then starts to work on how we think about ourselves and how we have more self-compassion and love for ourselves by offering that to others. Some sufferings are due to societal inequality, and certainly we can see that in this country without a doubt. Others are due to how we look at life. When we cannot see the purpose of our lives, we may also experience spiritual suffering. This is due in part to having not yet met wise elders who show us a viable path to inner peace. How many people here feel like they suffer from societal inequality? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What kind of societal inequality? How would you name it? What would you say about it? Poverty, yeah. Mm-hmm. What else? Pardon? Racism, yeah. Mm-hmm. Sexism, yeah. Ageism, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if we start thinking about it, there's a lot of different inequality. And again, if we work with our inner landscape, it's about how we react to these things. It's not about, looking outward and getting angry at or, removing ourselves from those things. It's about how we can keep our love and compassion going in the midst of all of this confusion and difficulty and problems that we come up against. And I think for us to begin to do that, to really look at our own compassion for ourselves is really helpful and important. Because if I don't know how to give myself compassion, it's really hard for me to be compassionate to others. If I don't give it to myself, I don't even know what it feels like. So to then generate that for another is quite difficult, I think. And oftentimes, what seems like compassion actually might be people-pleasing or a very conditioned kind of actions. Often leads to burnout or anger, resentment, those kinds of things. And so this thing about really learning how to open our hearts to ourselves and to recognize that we have good qualities and that we are worthy of love and compassion and respect for ourselves simply because we are living beings, that's enough. Simply because of that. And if we do it that way, then it cuts the ties to others, that I'm only okay if they treat me a certain way, if they see me in a certain light. And then that gets really messy and, attachment comes and such. But just from our own side, I'm okay. I'm worthy of respect. I could give myself love and compassion simply because I'm a living being. When you hear that and try that on a little bit, does that seem doable, easy, or it's like...
Like if you take a necessary part of a car or machine or something out, it won't work. It's kind of like that feeling,
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's not there, things won't run,
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah. So how do we create some self-compassion, some respect from love for ourselves. How do you do that? Ethical conduct. Okay, so if you behave ethically, then you have respect for yourself. Metta meditation. So may I have love and compassion for myself. May I have peace and ease, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm.
Setting good boundaries, like knowing how to stay away from toxic people in your life or toxic situations. That was a big one for me.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important to build self-esteem and compassion for yourself.
Yeah.
Feel that you're worthy of love and compassion.
Yeah. Because if you're around people that are toxic, how does that impact your view of yourself? What is that mechanism?
It validates. It's like evidence for like I'm unworthy and people are treating me unworthy. So it just creates evidence for the feeling I already feel. It solidifies that thought.
Yeah.
If I stay there,
Yeah, so if people are saying those things to us or treating us that way, then it's easy to let that affirm that, yeah, I am worthless. I'm not good enough.
I actually practice the exercise that you told me a year ago to remember good things I have done, to recognize that I have good qualities. I just don't see them because I pay attention to the wrong things that I do. So I keep doing the exercise and I realize that, wow, I do a lot of good things and they come from here.
Yeah.
And I just start seeing that more natural now.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Yeah, what we pay attention to becomes our experience. Yeah. And it's helpful to remember that just kind of in an evolutionary way, way back when we were, walking around with the saber-toothed tigers, we developed this habit of looking for what was going to go wrong or what was the problem or what was scary or what was fearful or what was going to damage, And so we still have that tendency, and so we often put that to ourselves, and we look at the things where, I didn't do it right, or, and so we only look at that side, and it's so out of balance. And if we keep practicing that without, like Heidi said, to look at the other side of the things that we do that are positive, that are skillful, that are loving, that are compassionate, then we really have a skewed view of ourselves. And we can really kind of, go down the drain that way. Yeah. And get quite discouraged, I think, So it's very helpful to, at the end of the day, just review those things that you did out of kindness. And it can be simple things like, going into the store and somebody is walking up the same time you are and, they're older and they're having a little difficulty maneuvering and you open the door for them. Just simple things like that, and then to recognize that. We do these simple kindnesses all the time, but I don't think we're so connected to them. I don't think we let it come in to our hearts, And so then we're only focused on the deficiency, and it's hard to keep your mind uplifted when you're focusing on the deficiencies. It's like a wasteland, and it's not realistic. It's not realistic. But like Heidi said, that won't come, and I won't get the benefit of seeing myself in a more realistic, balanced manner unless I, at first, actually force myself to do it. Especially in this society, I think, if we do that, we're like selfish and all about ourselves or something, but that is not accurate. It's okay to highlight our effort in being kind and generous and compassionate. It's okay to do that. And so at first it just feels weird, but the more we practice it, the more we feel the benefit of that, the more we feel the balance of that. And then when we're stressed, instead of just anger popping up maybe, what can pop up is some compassion and some equanimity and some love. Our repertoire is more filled out, more balanced. She goes on to say, by meditating on equanimity, we can free ourselves from attachment, hostility, and apathy toward others. In doing so, we can gradually cultivate love and compassion, wishing others to have happiness and freedom from suffering. Our goal is to feel love and compassion for all beings, including ourselves. It is important not to leave ourselves out because we are a part of all living beings. Singling ourselves out for special attention, either denying ourselves love and compassion or being self-indulgent, is a product of unfair bias. That's interesting how she says that. So denying ourselves love and compassion, how is that special attention to ourselves? How could you unpack that a little bit? What would that be like? What's at play when we're in that space?
Just this morning when Matuk and I, we spoke a little bit about basically compassionate listening to ourselves. Listening what is going on in our mind, especially maybe when there's a turbulence around us or something happens, instead of reacting, stepping back and really listening, what kind of feelings do I have, recognizing them, and what do I need? And that needs slowing down. And it's a way of kindly, it's like turning kindly towards a child, It's the same way.
Yeah.
And you're maybe a bit vulnerable at that time. And so what you want for a child is to calm down firstly, and then to recognize it's not, you're okay.
Yeah.
So, and then find in that calmness the tools you need to go forward.
Yeah. So what you just described, the first step of that is acceptance of what is going on inside. Not judging, not criticizing, not distracting, not pushing it away, but fully accepting it, whatever it is. Yeah. And I think to accept what's going on with ourselves takes some courage. It's not so easy. When it's messy in there, it's not so easy. And to think about how to approach ourselves when our mind is afflicted with some balance. And so what does that take to look at it with some balance? How can we approach ourselves with a balanced view? It seems like we need to open our perspective a little bit and again connect ourselves with all other living beings. Everybody has afflictions. There isn't one of us that doesn't here, is there? We all have our moments. And so just by remembering that, thinking it that way, really helps to open the door to, oh yeah, I'm just like everybody else. I don't want to be complacent. I want to figure out how I can turn this and be more skillful, of course. But I don't need to criticize myself or hate myself or, judge myself so harshly. I can put myself within the rest of humanity and see that we all are struggling and working on these things. And what's the good news? Gosh, that somebody has already gone through all of this and figured it out. And there are so many methods to use to work with our minds, to come to a place of balance and equanimity toward ourselves and then to others. We'd be in deep doo-doo if there wasn't, a fix, a remedy. But there's remedies. She goes on to say our goal is to feel love and compassion for all beings, including ourselves. Oh, I read that already. Like everyone else, we want to be happy and avoid suffering. There is no reason to treat ourselves differently than others, either better or worse in that regard. From a Buddhist viewpoint, all beings are worthy of compassion and kindness because the fundamental nature of our minds is pure and untainted. The fundamental nature of our minds is pure and untainted. This fundamental purity can never be taken away or permanently stained. So the analogy they use a lot is that our mind is like the clouds in the sky. So clouds come, clouds go. That's our afflictions. That's our, all the misery that we experience from those afflictions. But always above the clouds, clear, clean blue sky. That's the mind. This fundamental purity can never be taken away or permanently stained. Furthermore, each of us has the potential to be virtuous, and there is no such thing as an evil person who is inherently damaged and corrupt. It is important to differentiate between a person and that person's actions. Although we may engage in misguided or unwholesome actions, it does not mean that we are evil people, because our fundamental nature is untainted. That is, wrong conceptions and disturbing emotions have not entered into the nature of the mind itself. For this reason, every living being is worthy of compassion, even though they may sometimes be overwhelmed by disturbing emotions or act in ways that harm others because of these emotions. We don't have to prove ourselves to others or conform to an external standard to be worthy of compassion. Simply being a living being is good enough. Our negative emotions and mistaken actions are not who we are. They are not our fundamental nature. Therefore, we can change and improve. No one is hopeless. So there's a lot here to think about. Do people have comments about what I just read? Anything that they'd like to share? Maybe questions. Yeah.
So just a comment, it made me think of when you were saying why we lack that compassion for ourselves at times. And I think what I really struggled with was I tend to over exaggerate a lot. And then I would say, oh, I can't be compassionate for myself, or I can't give myself that self-care because I'm in a good situation. Like I have a home, I have food, like only people who are in bad situations like deserve that love and compassion. Like I should be happy, I should be okay. And I think that's where a lot of my self-neglect for self-love and care came from, you know?
Yeah.
And then I remember I was talking to someone and they're like, well, why do you have to compare yourself to that situation? Like your distress and your bad feelings are valid too. Like it's okay. And so it took me a while, but I got there. And so just our talk today really made me think like, wow, I've really progressed there. Because it was a constant comparison, like, oh, I don't need to worry about myself because there's other people in way worse situations.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, good insight. Yeah. And like you say, it takes some effort to deconstruct that habit. Often we learn that habit, I think, as kids. I did, certainly when I was a kid, because if you don't have any expectations at all and you don't attend to yourself, then maybe it won't be so difficult and painful, you know. And of course, that doesn't work, but that's kind of kid mind. Yeah. If you push the little button, it'll go green, and then you can talk in the mic.
Okay, so I'm, recognizing that everyone has good qualities, remembering that, but being around, when you're around someone that feels like they rattle your tree. I mean, I'm trying to, deal with that right now, to be patient. But sometimes I don't want to cut people off or anything like that. I just want to be respectful, and sometimes my behavior doesn't match up to my intentions.
Yeah.
And I wonder what to do about that.
Yeah, How many of us have difficulty with that scenario? Yeah, so first of all, you're in really good company. Yeah. It's a process. It's not a quick fix. Some of the things that I work with is I rehearse and prepare in my mind before I'm going to have a difficult conversation, or I know that it's going to be not so easy, and I practice what I'm going to say. I sometimes ground myself and keep some resources available for myself. And it's kind of like this practice of keeping some of the attention on what the person is saying and some of the attention on what my mind is reacting and thinking. And keeping attention to my own mind actually keeps me grounded and helps me remember that what that person is saying, how they are communicating, is the sum total of many, many different things. I have my reaction, they have their experience, how they are feeling that day is influencing that, how I am feeling this day is influencing that. And so thinking that way keeps the perspective quite wide, and so it's not just single-pointedly looking or thinking and listening to what they're saying and then just being a reaction machine to that and getting all, rattled or triggered. Yeah. If I can't do that, I will stop the conversation. I will just own that right now what I need to do is go think about what you've said, and I can't talk right now, and I take my leave. And sometimes people don't want you to do that, and they want to follow you. So I'll say it again. There's some research that says if you say the same thing 3 or 4 times, usually it'll start getting in. And so I'll do that sometimes, and then I take my leave. But sometimes I just have had to, leave and go to another room or go to another place and stop the conversation. And then to remember that I'm doing that so I don't get sucked into that and I start using words that are harming, because I don't want to do that. And it sounds like you don't want to do that at all. Yeah. Yeah. How about other people in the room? What other methods do you use? Because we all have this experience, What has worked in the past for other folks?
So what comes to my mind when you ask that question, especially around impatience and anger, is we have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
We all are in such a rush, especially in America.
Yeah.
And when I started giving myself plenty of time to respond to everything, my responses were more positive.
Yeah.
Even like on the freeway, we're like, oh, I've got to get in front of that person.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to be there 10 seconds faster?
Yeah.
And you just aggravated yourself.
Yeah.
And the person you just cut in front of.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just give myself lots of time.
Yeah.
And I'm not a slow person. I get a lot done.
Yeah. Yeah.
5 seconds feels like a lot of time when you're just waiting to say the next word.
Yeah.
But you've got all the time you need.
Yeah.
The only person making you go faster is you inside your own head.
Yep. 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 Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. So again, that's self-compassion. That's being visible to yourself. I am worthy to take the time I need to do it the way that I know is going to bring a positive result. That's really what you're saying. That's beautiful. Yeah.